Hi everyone, welcome back to Growing Up in Scientology. In today's video, I want to discuss L. Ron Hubbard's military service. So one thing that can be fun is comparing the bullshit propaganda that the Church of Scientology puts out on various subjects and comparing it with real world information just to show how comfortable Scientology is putting out just absolute garbage and nonsense that they expect people, mostly Scientologists, to believe. But what is even more fun than comparing Scientology's propaganda to real world information is comparing Scientology propaganda to alternative and conflicting versions of Scientology's own propaganda. And that is exactly what researcher and historian Chris Owen did in the first chapter of his book called Ron the War Hero. The full title of the book is Ron the War Hero, the true story of L. Ron Hubbard's calamitous military career. This is not a new book. It says originally published in 1999. I believe Chris has released an updated version of the book more recently, but I'm just reading it for the first time. The amount of work and research that Chris Owen put into this book is really quite something. Scientology puts out information about L. Ron Hubbard and his life and his history and his military career in a few different ways, but one of the main ways that they do it is at their live international events that are held 5 or 6 times a year, where either David Miscavige or L. Ron Hubbard's biographer will get up on stage and give some really long, detailed briefing with like minute details included in the story that like nobody could possibly know such details, and yet they're sprinkled into the story to give it this appearance of credibility. Like nobody would lie about such small details like that. And I remember being a member, being a staff member, being a Sea Org member, sitting at the events as these briefings are happening and just completely swallowing everything that was being said. There was not one part of my being that doubted the truthfulness of any of the information given about L. Ron Hubbard and his history. So when I read this first chapter of the book and I saw the glaring contradictions in the stories that even the Church of Scientology has put out about L. Ron Hubbard's military service, I just thought, I've got to do a video about this. I've got to read this on video and put it out as a standalone thing, just almost for amusement's sake, so that everyone can see. I mean, I wanted to highlight the extensive work that Chris has done in this book, but I just wanted everyone to be able to see how absurd the contradictions are that Scientology has put out about L. Ron Hubbard's service. I was able to meet Chris Owen in person last week and chat with him for a little bit, and he's just a really impressive guy, really smart guy, really strong in his research. And I figured as I read this book, if there's other chapters that I think are appropriate to do a video on, I'd be happy to do so. So chapter 1 is about 6 or 7 pages of text here. I'm going to do my best to keep it interesting. Here we go. The title of chapter 1 is Scientology's Account. Just to give you an idea of how many citations Chris includes to back up all of the information he provides here, I'm going to verbally note whenever a citation is given. All right, chapter 1, Scientology's Account. According to L. Ron Hubbard and the Church of Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard excelled as a machine gunner with the National Guard, citation, and served with distinction in the U.S. Marine Corps, citation, before being commissioned into the U.S. Navy, either before the war, citation, or alternatively, on its outbreak, citation. Just before he joined the Navy, he was responsible for the establishment of the U.S. Army Air Force, citation. He carried out a 2,000-mile voyage to Alaska in 1940 on behalf of the U.S. Navy, citation, and subsequently wrote the Navy's Hydrographic Office publications, citation. His work on navigation was so far-reaching that the Navy was anxious to enlist him, citation, and he was summoned to Washington, D.C. for a debriefing by Rear Admiral Chester Nimitz, later famous for his role in the Pacific, citation. After the U.S. entered the war, he was ordered to the Philippines, which he had known as a youngster, citation, and was the first of 3 theaters of war in which he saw combat, citation, and fought with distinction, citation. Alternatively, he was posted to the USS Edsel, on which he was the gunnery officer, and landed on the north coast of Java in the Dutch East Indies on the same day as Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. He was cut off near Surabaya by invading Japanese forces in February 1942. After a grueling trek through the jungle to the south coast, he scrambled into a rubber raft and sailed across the Timor Sea to within 100 miles of the Australian coast before being picked up by a friendly destroyer. Citation. He used the skills he learned in the Boy Scouts to keep himself alive. Citation. An alternative version is that he first served in Australia, where he coordinated naval intelligence activities and was senior officer present ashore. Citation. Another alternative is that he was in Australia working to coordinate relief for General Douglas MacArthur's forces. Citation. He worked as a counterintelligence officer to organize relief for the beleaguered American forces on Bataan. Citation. While escaping from the Japanese on Java, he suffered severe injuries after being machine gunned in the back. Citation. Alternatively, he fractured an ankle while evading the Japanese. Citation. Or was wounded in the thigh while serving in the Battle of the Java Sea. Citation. He was flown home in the Secretary of the Navy's private plane as the first U.S. casualty returned from the Far East. Citation. Having seen hard action in the South Pacific. Citation. Another account states that during 1941 to 1942, he served in Brisbane as a mail officer, manning the only anti-aircraft battery in Australia. Citation. His posting ended when he was relieved by 15 officers of rank. Citation. Alternatively, he commanded a gunboat in the Pacific, sailed to a Japanese-occupied island, tied up at the dock, went ashore, and wandered around by himself for 3 days. Citation. Arriving back in the U.S. in 1942, he recuperated from his injuries while serving in the cable censor's office in New York, before being posted to the North Atlantic Theater. Citation. Alternatively, the shortage of skilled officers was so bad that after a week in the hospital, he was ordered at once to the command of a North Atlantic corvette. Citation. Which had formerly been in British service as the Mist. He saw service for the remainder of that year with British and American anti-submarine vessels in the North Atlantic. Citation. He rose to command the 4th British Corvette Squadron, citation, and drew on his extensive experience as a world traveler to train naval crews, citation, in amphibious landing techniques, citation. Another version has it that he commanded the sub-chaser USS YP-422, aka USS Mist, and turned its crew, all hardened criminals transferred from Portsmouth Naval Prison, into the finest crew in the fleet. Citation. YP-422 was said to be an anti-submarine escort vessel with Atlantic convoys. Citation. In 1943, he was transferred to the North Pacific, where he was made Commodore of Corvette Squadrons. Citation. Alternatively, he commanded a 60-man sub-chaser, USS PC-815. Citation. He fought and sunk either 1 or 2 Japanese submarines off of the Oregon coast in May 1943. Citation. The following years, 1944 to 1945, he worked as an instructor at the Small Craft Training Center in San Pedro, California. Citation. And trained 15,000 naval personnel. Citation. He subsequently served with amphibious forces, citation, as navigation officer aboard the USS Algol, citation, a ship which he described as having, quote, about 700 men aboard it in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, unquote, citation. During his post aboard the Algol, he wrote a revolutionary textbook that greatly simplified the art of navigation, citation. He also, quote, pressed on with research into the plight of the human spirit despite all else, unquote, while serving on the Algol, citation. Some of his adventures on Algol were later made into a popular Hollywood film, Mr. Roberts, by his screenwriter friends. Citation. He later attended Princeton University as a postgraduate, citation, or alternatively attended the U.S. Navy's School of Government at Princeton as a student, citation, where he advised students and staff on the subjects of, quote, Oriental justice and law enforcement, unquote, citation. Another account says that Hubbard saw action aboard a destroyer in the Aleutians in late 1944. Citation. An alternative account says that his final active service post in the U.S. Navy was in the office of the Provost Marshal in Korea in 1945. Citation. Hubbard ended the war in either 44 or 45, quote, highly decorated and grievously wounded, unquote, citation. He was crippled and blinded after an unexploded shell which had landed on the deck of his ship and which he was throwing overboard, exploded in his face, citation. Alternatively, he had suffered flash burn injuries to his eyes while serving as gunnery officer aboard the USS Edsall earlier in the war, resulting in him being declared, quote, legally blind, unquote, citation. Yet another alternative is that he had been left lame by shrapnel fragments in hip and back, citation, or possibly in the chest, citation. He was, quote, twice pronounced dead, unquote, which was, quote, a matter of medical record, unquote, citation. He was taken to Oak Knoll Naval Hospital in California, where he was treated for injured optic nerves and physical injuries to his hip and back, citation. By applying his own revolutionary mental therapies, which later became the basis of Scientology, he recovered so fully that he was reclassified for full combat duty, to the amazement of the naval authorities, citation. He spent a full year in Oak Knoll Hospital and was fully recovered by 1947, citation. As a result of which he lost his retirement pension, citation. This fact shook the medical and psychiatric officers of the Navy's retiring board as their, quote, fixed ideas and practices had received a hard blow, unquote, citation. Hubbard was, quote, given a perfect score on mental and physical fitness reports, unquote, in 1950, citation, and was officially assessed as having, quote, no neurotic or psychotic tendencies of any kind whatsoever, unquote, citation. He also healed 11 patients suffering from serious war-related conditions, citation. Hubbard's wartime service took him to all 5 theaters of World War II, for which he was rewarded with 21 medals and palms, citation, or alternatively, 27 decorations, citation, or even 29, citation, for his duties under fire, citation. Despite his heroics, Hubbard was not a man who enjoyed war and saw enough killing to last him a lifetime, citation. He resigned his commission rather than assist government research projects and instead published in 1948 his, quote, original thesis, unquote, on his discoveries about the mind, citation. This led in due course to Dianetics and Scientology. And just in case I didn't explain it clearly in the beginning, these citations aren't to references proving that these statements about Hubbard's service are true. These are citations of where the Church of Scientology, or L. Ron Hubbard himself, has said these things about Hubbard's service. The chapter continues. Confused? The Church of Scientology certainly is. This improbable and contradictory account was assembled from over 30 different sources, which were published by the Church of Scientology itself. The Church's own websites have presented at least 3 different versions of Hubbard's military career since 1996. As this shows, the Church has been chronically unable to present a coherent picture of what exactly he did. This is hardly surprising. Hubbard did not produce a formal autobiography. However, he often made claims about his life in the dozens of books, hundreds of lectures, and thousands of minutes and directives that he produced between 1950 and his death in 1986. He also dictated some biographical notes in the 1970s in answer to questions from his public relations staff. Unfortunately for the Church, he did not keep his story straight. Many of his accounts contradict each other. Hubbard left his followers with an impossible task in reconciling his different stories. The Church of Scientology has a literalist attitude towards Hubbard's work, regarding him as the unimpeachable source of its belief system. Everything he wrote and said is deemed to be factually accurate, even if it is self-contradictory. The possibility that Hubbard was wrong, or worse, that he was lying, is simply not open for discussion. It would be regarded as invalidating source, one of the most serious offenses a Scientologist can commit. A few of Hubbard's works focus directly on his own life, notably the lecture called The Story of Dianetics and Scientology, which he gave in 1958, and the essay called My Philosophy, which he wrote in 1965. To this day, both are regarded as being of key importance in Scientology. It is unclear whether Hubbard wrote the biographical accounts contained in some of the Scientology books and publications quoted earlier in this chapter. Although their copyright was assigned to Hubbard, others likely wrote them on his behalf, and the biographical statements were probably compiled from statements that he had made in lectures. Hubbard is also known to have written some biographical statements in the third person without claiming attribution. Whether or not he wrote them, there can be little doubt that Hubbard personally approved most, if not all, of the biographical accounts published before his death. All were published by the Church of Scientology. The draconian penalties that the Church imposes for unauthorized publications would have ensured that its executives sought high-level clearance, probably from Hubbard himself. He would certainly have been the only source for the information on his naval career. as the U.S. Navy's privacy rules meant that until Hubbard's death in '86, nobody outside the U.S. government could obtain his files without his permission. Even the Church of Scientology did not have a copy of the files until it obtained a set in 1979 with Hubbard's permission. As the compilation of accounts earlier in this chapter illustrates, the Church of Scientology and Hubbard himself were careless about consistency in published biographical accounts. That did not really matter, so long as his service records were still being withheld by the Navy. Even writers who were critical about Hubbard and Scientology presented his claims as fact. Scandal of Scientology author Paulette Cooper, for example, wrote in 1971 that, quote, "He was severely injured in the war, and in fact was in a lifeboat for many days, badly injuring his body and his eyes in the hot Pacific sun," unquote. The passage of the Freedom of Information Act in 1973 began to open the floodgates. Ironically, the Church of Scientology had campaigned for the act in order to help it see the government's files on Scientology. Although privacy constraints meant that Hubbard's personal record remained sealed to the general public until his death in 1986, other documents, such as his ship's logbooks and previously classified action reports, became publicly available. An amateur researcher, Michael Shannon, had by 1979 amassed a mountain of material, which included some files that no one else had bothered to get copies of. For example, the logbooks of the Navy ships that Hubbard had served on, and his father's Navy service file. A copy of Shannon's document collection eventually reached Jerry Armstrong, a Canadian Scientologist who was working as L. Ron Hubbard's archivist and biography researcher at the start of the 1980s, in collaboration with a non-Scientologist author named Omar V. Garrison. Armstrong became increasingly disillusioned by what he found in Hubbard's personal files. He realized that Hubbard's life story had been grossly misrepresented over the years and urged the church to correct the record before they suffered the embarrassment of Hubbard's falsehoods being exposed publicly. Armstrong wrote, "If we present inaccuracies, hyperbole, or downright lies as fact or truth, it doesn't matter what slant we give them. If disproved, the man will look to outsiders at least like a charlatan." Armstrong's superiors reacted with hostility to his entreaties. He left Scientology in December 1981, and the church declared Armstrong a suppressive person in February 1982. He had earlier provided Garrison with documents from Hubbard's personal files to assist with the production of an official biography of Scientology's founder. After Armstrong was declared a suppressive by the church, Garrison gave him a number of Hubbard's documents, including material from the U.S. Navy and Veterans Administration files, which Armstrong sent to lawyers who had agreed to represent him. This prompted a lawsuit from the church, which went to trial in Los Angeles Superior Court in 1984. Armstrong's defense centered on his contention that he was right about the falsity of the church's version of Hubbard's biography. The church brought in a former U.S. Navy officer who had served under Hubbard in an attempt to rebut Armstrong's findings in court. The subsequent cross-examination was widely publicized and proved devastating for the church, which lost the case. Hubbard's death in January 1986 finally enabled members of the public to obtain his full service record and military medical files. The story told by the files is very different from the many contradictory accounts that the Church of Scientology has published over the years. And that's the end of the first chapter. It was about a month ago that I read that for the first time, and afterwards I got to talking to a few other former Scientologists about it, and I was really surprised to hear that for some of them, what had first gotten them to question Scientology or question their ongoing involvement in Scientology, what created the first crack in the dam for them, was information that caused them to question or to no longer believe the story they had been told about Hubbard's history. And that information such as this that really highlights that not only does the Church of Scientology lie about Hubbard's military service and about his history in general, but that L. Ron Hubbard himself lied about his history and his military service. That it's not just other people getting things wrong about Hubbard. It was Hubbard lying intentionally, willfully, and knowingly, not even just exaggerating, just bald-faced lying about what he did in the military. So this information might mean different things to different people. I personally just found it to be a really impressive collection of information that L. Ron Hubbard and the Church of Scientology has put out in its own words to show they can't even keep their own story straight. They're not just bullshitting everyone else, they're bullshitting themselves as well. I hope this has been at least mildly interesting. That's all I've got on this for now. Talk to you guys soon. Bye.
Okay, if you want to see my rock and roll songs, click right on this guitar. And if you want to see a different one of my videos, then you could click right inside here. If you have subscribed or not, subscribe right here. Bye.